because I forgot to do that last week. And I'll share my screen as well. Here it is. Okay, so just a reminder of our schedule. We're meeting next Sunday, the 27th, and then we're off on the 3rd. I can't believe 2 weeks from today, my son is getting married. That's just like a crazy, crazy idea. And so we're off on the 3rd, but then back on the 10th. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So where we left off at this S, still talking about partitions in a courtyard, what they're built, what they should be made of, how you can require both co-owners of the courtyard or the property to build a wall, etc., etc. Okay, so the Mishnah teaches, we're at this red S here, in a place where it is customary to build a wall of non-chiseled stone, or chiseled stone, or small bricks or large bricks, they must build the partition with that material. So that's a reminder from the Mishnah in small print. Now the large print is what the Gemara is getting to. Everything is in accordance with the regional custom. The Gemara asks, what does the word everything to serve to add? Right? So in other words, why do you need the word hakol? Well, you could just say the non-chiseled, chiseled, small brick, large brick is according to custom. What is the everything is in accordance with the regional custom? The Gemara answers, it serves to add a place where it's customary to build a partition out of palm and laurel branches. In such a place, the partition is built from those materials. So the common material is non-chiseled or chiseled stone or small bricks or large bricks. They put the everything in to say, well, even if it's any other kind of thing, even branches, then that's what they do. So here in the notes, just on my screen, need to move you so I can read it. Where it is customary to build out of palm and laurel branches. Some commentaries hold that even if people use a more transparent barrier than palm and laurel branches, that is an acceptable custom. So in other words, in terms of the privacy, right? So if you have something more transparent, so with the palm and laurel branches, you probably can see through it, but maybe the leaves on it might make it hard to see through, but something more transparent, I don't know, thinner branches or whatever. But Rabbeinu Tam maintains that anything less than palm and laurel branches is a foolish custom and should not be tolerated even in a place where people do so. All right, so there's local custom and then there's foolish local custom. So the Gemara is willing to follow local custom to a point. So Rabbeinu Tam, who's a grandson of Rashi, so we're talking about the Alsace-Lorraine region about 900 years ago. He's saying, whatever else that is less than palm and laurel branches shouldn't be tolerated. Now, they wouldn't have palm branches in Alsace-Lorraine. I don't know about laurel. They might. So I don't know what other branches. I mean, you would have evergreens in Alsace-Lorraine, and I would think that the evergreen branches would be pretty thick, and that would be fine. Okay, so the Mishnah teaches, therefore, if the wall later falls, the assumption is that the space where the wall stood and the stones belong to both of them to be divided equally. Okay, so you have this wall made of this material built in the middle of the property. And if the wall collapses, then the wall itself belongs to both of them, and it's divided equally, and then you rebuild it or you use the material or buy new material to rebuild the wall. The Gemara questions the need for this ruling. Isn't it obvious that this is the case? Did I say the bracha, by the way?
No.
No, okay. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So the Gemara questions the need for this ruling. Isn't it obvious that this is the case since both neighbors participated in the construction of the wall? The Gemara answers, no, it's necessary to teach this halacha for a case where the entire wall fell into the domain of one of them. So if the wall falls into the property of one of them, but not into both of them, you need this ruling to say, the owner of that property that has the entire broken wall in it shouldn't think that he now owns the whole wall. The wall still belongs to the two of them. Alternatively, yes, Bess?
What if one of the homeowners is not the original homeowner who donated half of the wall brick?
I don't think it matters. I think what matters is who owns the property now.
Okay.
So the original owners, I think that what the Mishnah is teaching is that co-owned property needs a wall. And however many generations the property gets passed down, the wall gets passed down too. So the Gemara answers, no, isn't it obvious that this is a case since both neighbors participated in the construction of the wall? The Gemara, no, it's necessary to teach whether, okay. Alternatively, it's necessary, like why do we need this ruling? We need it because if it all fell into the domain of one of them. Alternatively, it's necessary in a case where one of them already cleared all the stones into his own domain. Lest you say that the other party should be governed by the principle that the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. That is, if the other party should have to prove that he had been a partner in the construction of the wall, the Mishnah teaches us they are presumed to have been partners in the building of the wall, and neither requires further proof. All right, so then it gets into the legalities of who built the wall. There's no burden of proof. It's just assumed, and no legal claim required or legal action required. Both of them share in the wall. Okay, on to a different topic. The Mishnah continues, and similarly, with regard to a garden, in a place where it's customary to build a partition in the middle of a garden jointly owned by two people, and one of them wishes to build such a partition, the court obligates his neighbor to join in building the partition. The Gemara comments, this matter itself is difficult. On the one hand, you said, and similarly with regard to a garden in a place where it's customary to build a partition in the middle of a garden jointly owned by two people, and one of them wishes to build such a partition, the court obligates his neighbor to join the building of the partition. One can infer that ordinarily where there is no custom, the court does not obligate him to build a partition. So what's the case? Are you supposed to build a partition in a co-owned garden or not? But say the latter clause of the Mishnah, but with regard to an expanse of fields in a place where it's customary not to build a partition between two people's fields, and one person wishes to build a partition between his field and that of his neighbor, the court does not obligate his neighbor to build such a partition, right? So in a field, in a place where it's not customary to build a partition, the court doesn't obligate a partition. One can infer that ordinarily, where there is no custom, the court obligates him to build a partition. The Gemara explains the difficulty. So what's the difference between a field and a garden? Do courts obligate or don't they obligate? The Gemara explains the difficulty. Now that you said by inference that in an ordinary garden, the court does not obligate him to build a partition, is it necessary to say that the court does not obligate him to build a partition in an ordinary field? Clearly, in a field, there's less of a need for a partition, as there is less damage caused by exposure to the gaze of others. Right? So if the reason of the partition is to keep people from looking in, so the field, there is less need for a partition, because depending where you are on the field, in terms of a public thoroughfare, people just aren't walking by a field. But a garden in front of a house, maybe people are walking by there. Abaye said that this is what the Tana, the rabbi of the Mishnah, is saying. And similarly, with regard to an ordinary garden, and also in a place where it's customary to build a partition in an expanse of fields, the court obligates him to build a partition. Rava said to him, if so, what's the point of the word but mentioned afterward in connection with an expanse of fields, which seems to indicate that the issue of fields had not yet been addressed? Rather, Rava said that this is what the Tana is teaching, and similarly, an ordinary garden is treated like a place where it's customary to build a partition, and therefore the court obligates him to build a partition. But an ordinary expanse of fields is treated like a place where it's customary not to build a partition, and therefore the court does not obligate him to build one. Okay, so just this back and forth about the obligations in places where they do build, places where they don't build, garden versus field. Okay. The Mishnah teaches, rather, if one person wishes to erect a partition, he must withdraw into his own field and build the partition there. And he makes a border mark on the outer side of the barrier facing his neighbor's property, indicating that he built the entire structure of his own materials and on his own land. The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of a border mark? So what would this border mark look like? So we don't have a picture here, because that's just a picture of a partition with an edge on it. So the question is, what's the border mark look like? Rav Huna said he bends the edge of the wall towards the outside. So that's what this picture might show. So in other words, here's the wall that would be on his property, and then on the top of it, it's kind of folded over like this, and that's to show that the wall belongs to the one owner and not to both of them. So that's what Huna says. He bends the edge of the wall toward the outside. The Gemara suggests, let him make it on the inside. The Gemara explains, in that case, his neighbor might also make a mark on the outside, that is, on the side facing his own property, and say, the wall is both mine and his. The Gemara responds, if so, that is, there is a concern about such deception. Now also, when the person who builds the wall makes a border mark on the outer side of the wall, his neighbor might cut it off and say, the wall is both mine and his. The Gemara answers, such a cut is noticeable and the deception will not work. In other words, if it's here like this, the guy on the other half of the property might take advantage of the wall being there, and he could say to other people and to the other that the wall is actually his. So he'll take advantage of being a cheapskate, let the other guy build the wall, even if the edge is hanging over, and provide some deception like that to try to get to say that he's a co-owner of the wall. But still, in that case, we don't believe him, because the outer edge like that proves that the other guy built the wall himself. Okay? There are those who say that in answer to the question, what's the meaning of a border mark, Rav Huna said he bends the edge of the wall toward the inside. So it's the same Huna, and they're not sure what Huna said. Did Huna say that a wall should look like this, bent to the outside, or should it be bent to the inside on into his property, bend it toward the inside? The Gemara suggests, let him make it on the outside. The Gemara explains, in that case, his neighbor might cut it off and say, the wall is both mine and his. The Gemara asks, if so, that is, there is a concern for such deception. Now also, when the person who builds the wall makes a border mark toward the inside, his neighbor might add a border mark on his own side and say, the wall is both mine and his. The Gemara answers, an addition is noticeable and the deception will not work. The Gemara asks, but doesn't the Mishnah teach that he makes the border mark on the outside, not on the inside? The Gemara comments, this is a difficulty. So we're not exactly sure what Huna said, but we do know that if the wall is built like this, and then the other owner makes some other kind of mark, then that other mark would be noticeable. And we're just clear that if a wall's built like this, only one owner built it.
Rabbi,
Yes.
this all seems sort of, I'll say, somewhat ridiculous because somehow they have to know where the property is to build a wall to begin with. So wouldn't they have
Right.
other independent measures of where the wall, of where the property is?
Yeah, so that's a good question about how they surveyed the property. I mean, people today do this when they're building fences, right, around their property, that somehow you take out your deed or the title to your property and you have like a plat, right? A map of what exactly your property lines are. And then the people building the fence use that in order to build the fence inside your property. So, I mean, I just look at my own house as an example. We do not have a fence around our property because we don't have a dog. And other people around us in our backyards, they all have dogs and they've all added fences over the years. And it's all been on the inside of their property. They haven't encroached onto my property. So it's easy to do this now because properties are surveyed and you know exactly where your property line is. I'm not sure how clear those property lines were back in the day. So you'd have to go, I guess, to the court if there's a question about the owners themselves. It's only a question if they have a question, right? Usually the owners knew where their property ended, and probably the way the field is plowed also will determine easily where the property line ends and where the next one begins, right? You leave room for plowing or for the machinery to get by, whatever they used back then. So it seemed pretty clear. I think there wouldn't have been a problem with property lines back then. There was just over the generations and the centuries in Babylonia or the land of Israel, the property lines are clear.
Rabbi, I had this exact problem actually several years ago.
Oh, yeah?
I had a situation where it wasn't the owners themselves, but there was a chain, there was a simple fence, and you couldn't tell which side was the good side, which people would sort of put on facing in so they could look at the good side, and which was the outside.
Huh.
And each of the two property owners was at least one or two owners removed from the people who actually put it in.
Right,
And the argument was, is it on my land? Is it on your land? And
right.
there were trees in the way, and it
Right.
became a problem. You couldn't effectively tell, and they did have to hire battling surveyors.
Right.
It became a mess. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a mess. Yes, it's good fences make good neighbors unless unless it doesn't, right? And these are the cases when the fences don't make good neighbors.
And
Or
it's job security, and it's
Right.
job security for
right, that for courts, right. Right, or bad neighbors make bad fences in this case. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan said, the party who builds the wall should smear it with clay up to a cubit at the top of the wall on the outside. The Gemara suggests. So in other words, if only one owner is going to build a fence, Huna says either you bend over the top of it on the inside or you bend it on the outside. So we don't know which one he said. Yochanan is now saying, how does the one owner build a fence on his property to prove that it is his and only his? So the party who builds the wall should smear it with clay up to a cubit at the top of the wall on the outside, right? So you put a layer of clay over the wall up to a cubit before the top of the wall. And the Gemara suggests let him do this on the inside. The Gemara explains, right? So where do you smear it? Yochanan says you smear it on the outside. Gemara says you should do it on the inside. The Gemara explains. In that case, his neighbor might also do it on the outside, that is on the side facing his own property, and say, the wall is both mine and his. So in other words, he could take advantage of this method of marking it with clay by doing it on the outside of the wall, and then he could show that it's his. The Gemara responds, if so, that is, if there's a concern for such deception, now also when the person who builds the wall smears it with clay on the outside, his neighbor can peel it off and say the wall is both mine and his. The Gemara explains peeling clay is noticeable and the deception will not succeed. So if you're going to, if the deceiving owner might want to peel off the clay to show that he has the right to do so because he thinks it's his, then people will see that it's been peeled off and know that it's only the one owner's. Right, the notes don't really help us here. Okay, the Gemara asks, if he builds a partition of palm branches, how does he make a border mark? Okay, so it's one thing if you're doing it with stones or bricks, but what if you're doing the wall with branches and the one owner does the branches just on his side of the property? Then what kind of marker do you use? Rav Nachman said he directs the tips of the branches to the outside. So there's background here, the tips of branches to the outside, and here we have a picture of a wall like that. This partition is made of woven palm branches. The border mark is fashioned by directing the tips of the branches to the outer side of the partition. All right, so they're kind of tipped that way. Directs the tips of the branches to the outside. The Gemara suggests, let him do this to the inside. Right, so Nachman says tip it to the outside. Gemara says tip it to the inside. Gemara states if he so directs the branches, his neighbor might also do the same to the outside, that is, to the side facing his own property, and say the partition is both mine and his. The Gemara objects. If so, that is, if there's concern for such deception, now also when the one who builds the partition directs the tips of the branches to the outside, the neighbor can cut off the tips and throw them away and say the partition is both mine and his. The Gemara counsels he should smear the tips of the branches with clay. The Gemara comments, now also the neighbor might come and peel the clay off. The Gemara answers, peeling is noticeable. So it's tough. If you're dealing with deceptive people, it's kind of hard to to build something in a way that's going to prove that it's only the one owner's wall.
Wouldn't animals eat the tips? A goat comes over and eats.
If it's tall, then the animal can't reach it. But I don't know. I don't know if birds would pick at it, squirrels would get to it.
Horse.
Good question. I don't know. Abaye said, one who builds a partition of palm branches has no remedy to prove who erected it except with a written document. The neighbor should draw up a document stating that he has no claim to the space or to the partition because they belong exclusively to the other neighbor. Okay, so why don't you say this to begin with? Write a document, get both people to sign to agree that the partition is the one's and not both of them. Okay, so that's how that part of the discussion ends. To be absolutely clear, write a document. The Mishnah teaches, nevertheless, in a place where it is not customary to build a partition between two people's fields, if they made such a partition with the agreement of the two of them, they build it in the middle, that is, on the property line, and make a border mark on the one side and on the other side. Okay, so if they're building a wall together, you got boundary marks on both sides of the wall, on both properties. Therefore, if the wall later falls, the assumption is that the space where the wall stood and the stones belong to both of them to be divided equally, right? You got the boundary markers there to prove where the wall would have gone in between, and that all the wall that fell down belongs to both of them, no matter where it falls. Rava from Parzika said to Rav Ashi, neither this one nor that one should make a border mark. Rav Ashi said to him, no, this ruling is necessary in a case where one of them went ahead and made a border mark for himself, so if his neighbor does not make one as well, the first one will say that it's entirely his. So that's why you need both border marks there, because if only one neighbor builds a border mark, maybe he's doing that to later deceive people to say that the wall was really his, and not both of them. So no matter what, we have these rules in effect here for people not to take advantage of other people. Okay. On to the next page. Rava from Parzika asked him, and is the Tana, the rabbi of the Mishnah, teaching us a remedy to be used against a swindler? Rav Ashi said to him, but isn't the former clause of the Mishnah's ruling also a remedy to be used against a swindler? That clause teaches that one who builds a wall should make a border mark to indicate that the wall is his. Rava from Parzika said to him, granted, in the former clause, the Tana taught the halacha that if one wishes to build a partition between his own field and that of his neighbor, he does so at his own expense and on his own land. And due to the need to teach that halacha, he also taught a remedy to be used against a swindler. But does he teach a halacha in the latter clause so that he also teaches a remedy to be used against a swindler? Ravina said, here in the latter clause, we're dealing with a barrier made of palm branches. This is to the exclusion of the opinion of Abaye, who said one who builds a partition of palm branches has no remedy to prove who erected it except with a written document. He teaches us that a border mark suffices. So some people say border marks are good enough, border marks on both sides of the partition, or a written document, and probably safest to go with Abaye's opinion to have a written document. Okay, new Mishnah. With regard to one who surrounds another on three sides, that is, he owns parcels of land on three sides of the other person's field, and he built a partition on the first, second, and third sides, the court does not obligate the neighbor who owns the inner field to contribute to the construction of the partition if he does not wish to do so. Rabbi Yossi says if he arose and built a partition on the fourth side of the field, the court imposes upon the owner of the inner field the responsibility to pay his share for all the partitions. Okay, so you get it? You can picture the picture a square, three sides of the square. You got one owner owning all of that, and the inner square is owned by somebody else. If the outer guy builds a wall around the three sides of the square that to show where his property is, then the inner guy doesn't have to build a wall on the fourth side. But if he decides to build a wall on the fourth side, then he has to contribute to the others, because clearly the inner guy cares about a wall if he's building a wall on the fourth side. But if he's not building the wall on the open side, the fourth side, then it's probably he doesn't care about a wall, and let the other guy pay all the money for the other walls. All right, so let's see what the Gemara has to say about this.
Well, my
Yeah, go ahead.
geometry might be faulty,
Yeah.
but the wall that we're talking about being built on the fourth empty wall space,
Yeah,
on the other side could be a third owner.
could be, but it's not saying. So maybe that'll be open for Gemara discussion too.
Okay.
Where's the fourth side leading to? Is it a public thoroughfare, or is it somebody else's property? We don't know. So let's see. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, who says that if he arose and built a partition on the fourth side of the field, the court imposes upon the owner of the inner field the responsibility to pay a share for all the partitions. The Gemara comments, it's no different if it was the owner of the surrounded field who arose and built a partition on the fourth side, and it's no different if it was the owner of the surrounding field who arose and built a partition on the fourth side. Wait. It's no different if it was the owner of the surrounded versus surrounding. So it's no different if it's the owner of the inner field, the inner guy who arose and built a partition on the fourth side. It's no different if it's the owner of the surrounding field who arose and built a partition. So I don't know why the outer guy for the three other walls would build one on the fourth side. because it's not clear from the Mishnah who owns the fourth side. So we don't know. The halacha is the same in both cases. It was stated that the Amoraim, that is the rabbis of the Talmud, disagreed with regard to the following point. Rav Huna says, just want to see if there's a picture. It's here. Here's a picture, what we're dealing with. So there's Shimon and Ruvain. Ruvain owns these, Shimon owns this. But the question is, who owns this part across from the brown, right? So that's the question. And so it seems like in the Gemara that Ruvain, we're calling this guy Ruvain, the three-sided field guy, that he might have built the wall on this, or Shimon built the wall on this. But the question is, why does Ruvain have the right to build this wall? Because the Mishnah doesn't say that Ruvain owns the field on the fourth side.
So if we say that Moshe owns the field on the fourth side,
Yeah.
why should he have to pay for the inner three walls?
Why should Shimon have to pay for all of
No,
these?
why should Moshe, who they're saying that the surrounded land pays?
That's Ruvain.
No, the Moshe, the other guy I'm talking. I made it up.
Shimon.
No, what if it's a third owner?
The third owner is the guy in white over here.
Yes, I'm
Okay,
calling
no,
him
that
Moshe.
we don't know. So, okay, you're calling him Moshe. So the Mishnah is saying, so let's just clarify this. The Mishnah is saying, if Ruvain built a wall on these three, but Shimon didn't build a wall here, then Ruvain has to pay for all of this himself. But if Shimon built a wall here, then Shimon has to participate in the cost of the other three walls. The question is, what if it seems from the Gemara that Ruvain is building this? Okay, besides these, and if Ruvain builds all four, then Shimon has to participate. The question would be why? Shimon, because how does Ruvain have the right to build this wall? Or let's say it's Bess and says it's Moshe who's building this, but we don't know about Moshe because the Gemara hasn't brought up Moshe. The Gemara has only brought up the possibility that Ruvain's building this. So my question is, why does Ruvain have the right to do that? And then why still, if somebody else is building the walls, why should Shimon have to participate if he didn't want the walls built? Okay, so it was stated that the Amoraim disagreed with regard to the following point. Rav Huna says that when Rabbi Yossi said the court obligates the owner of the inner field to pay his share for all the partitions, he pays in accordance with what the other person actually spent when he built the partitions. That is, the owner of the inner field must contribute his share according to the cost of the partition his neighbor built. Chia Bar Rav says he must pay his share for all the partitions in accordance with a reduced assessment of the price of reeds and no more. The owner of the surrounded field can claim he had no desire for a more substantial partition. So let's say this guy built the most expensive wall. Let's say it's the large chiseled stones, just say. Shimon, all he has to do is pay the cost of what it would have cost if you're building it out of reeds. So you pay a nominal price to say that you've participated in it. Okay, on to the next paragraph. The Gemara attempts to bring a proof from what we learned in the Mishnah with regard to one who surrounds another on three sides. That is, he owned parcels of land on three sides of the other person's field, and he built a partition on the first, second, third sides. The court does not obligate the neighbor who owns the inner field to contribute to the construction of the partition. By inference, if he also built a partition on the fourth side of the field, the court does obligate the owner of the inner field to contribute to the building of the partition. The Gemara continues with its proof. Say the latter clause of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi says, if he arose and built a partition on the fourth side of the field, the court imposes upon the owner of the inner field the responsibility to pay for a share of all the partitions. The first Tana and Rabbi Yossi seem to be stating the same ruling. Granted, according to Rav Huna, who says that the owner of the inner field pays for all the partitions in accordance with what the other person actually spent when he built the partitions. This is the difference between the first Tana and Rabbi Yossi. The first Tana maintains that yes, he pays his share for all the partitions in accordance with a reduced assessment of the price of reeds, but not a larger sum in accordance with what the other person actually spent when he built the partitions. And Rabbi Yossi maintains that he pays his share for all the partitions in accordance with what the other person actually spent when he built the partitions. So they're disagreeing about how much he's going to participate in the cost. Does he pay just the minimum amount, or does he pay the full amount based on what the building material was? But according to Chia Barav, who says he pays his share for all the partitions in accordance with the value of a partition fashioned from inexpensive reeds, what difference is there between the first Tana and Rabbi Yossi? If, according to the first Tana, he doesn't give him his share for all the partitions in accordance with the reduced assessment of the price of reeds, what does he give him? The Gemara answers, if you wish, say there's a practical difference between them with regard to the wage of a watchman. The first Tana maintains that yes, since his field is safeguarded by the partition which surrounds it, the one who built the partition can demand payment of the wage of a watchman. He cannot, however, demand the cost of building the partition, not even the other's share for all the partitions in accordance with the reduced assessment of price of reeds. Right? So, in other words, if you're saying that the inner field guy doesn't want to build a partition, just for the principle of it, he doesn't feel it's necessary, the outer guy who wants a partition can force the inner guy to pay for a watchman then. Because without a wall on that third wall, on that fourth wall, on that fourth side, then somebody could get in and take produce. So you need a watchman paid for. And Rabbi Yossi maintains that he can demand the other share for all the partitions in accordance with a reduced assessment of the price of reeds. And if you wish, say there's a practical difference between them with regard to the partitions built on the first, second, and third sides of the inner field. The first Tana maintains that the owner of the inner field must give to his neighbor money for the partition built on the fourth side, but he's not required to give him money for the partitions built on the first, second, and third sides. And Rabbi Yossi maintains that he must also give him money for the partitions built on the first, second, and third sides. So, are they disagreeing about the first, third, the three sides? Are they disagreeing about building a partition on the fourth side? Do they require the wage of a watchman to be paid for? So there's lots of disagreement without any resolution yet. The Gemara suggests another difference between the two opinions. If you wish, say there's a practical difference between them with regard to the issue of whether the partition on the fourth side was built by the owner of the surrounding field or by the owner of the surrounded field, like the inner guy. Was it built by the outer guy or the inner guy? This is because the first Tana maintains that the reason the owner of the surrounded field must contribute his share of the entire expense is that he arose and built a partition on the fourth side of his field. Therefore, the court imposes upon him the responsibility to pay his share for all the partitions, because his actions demonstrate that he wants the partition between their fields. But if the owner of the surrounding field arose and built a partition on the fourth side of the field, the owner of the surrounded field must give him only his share of the value of the partition of the fourth side. Okay, so if the owner of the three sides builds a partition on the fourth side and not the inner guy building it, then the inner guy would only pay his share of the value of that fourth wall.
So then Ruvain owns this, what I said Moshe owns.
But we don't know. We don't know.
Can he build a fence if
I
it's
don't
Moshe's
know.
property?
Right, I don't know. I don't know why the Gemara is not clarifying that for us yet, but maybe it will. And Rabbi Yossi maintains that this is no different if it was the owner of the surrounded field who arose and built a partition on the fourth side, and it's no different if it was the owner of the surrounding field who arose and built a partition on the fourth side. If either one arose and built a partition on the fourth side, the court imposes upon the owner of the inner field the obligation to pay his share for all the partitions. So one guy says that the inner guy only has to pay for the fourth wall. Yossi says if a fourth wall gets built, then the inner guy has to pay his share of all the walls on all four sides
So this seems unfair to
to the inner guy.
the inner guy, because what if he's really poor
Right.
and the outer guy just wants to, because he doesn't like the inner guy's field because it's got weeds or something like that. So
Yes, Steve, I can't tell you. I don't know necessarily about the circumstances of the inner guy and how he got to be in a field that's surrounded by other people's fields. But I think having a fence is just the price of being a farmer. And no matter how rich or poor you are, you have to build a fence. Now, he could argue that I'm just paying for the cost of a fence if it was built out of reeds, and that you would imagine any farmer would be able to afford.
Rabbi,
Yes,
I think what they're concerned about to some extent is what you would call sort of like unjust enrichment. The surrounded owner, the surrounded owner is getting the benefit of having his field fully separated
right,
just because he sits there and says, no, I don't want to participate. Go build a wall. And the guy builds a wall, and he goes, okay, fine. And then he does only the fourth side. He gets the benefit of 3 extra walls that he didn't contribute to. And
right.
the rabbis are concerned that this would be something people would do.
So, but that's based on the argument that there's a benefit to having a wall. You could
Yeah,
argue,
that's what they're concerned about, I
right,
think. Yeah.
maybe, but who knows? Maybe the inner guy doesn't see a benefit to having a wall and wall takes up space from property and he wants to farm to the edge of his property if he wants. And by having a wall, the edge is further in.
Well, what if the inner guy is raising cows and the outer guy is raising wheat? And the outer guy says, "Listen, I don't want your cows eating my
Right? No,
wheat."
you're right. You're right.
You know,
So, but then so the outer guy can just build a wall on his side.
But what
right?
if the,
But then
what if
the inner guy now is able to keep his cows nice and secure. He builds across the fourth side, and
Oh,
he gets the benefit.
if he builds the fourth side, then he has to contribute to the other sides.
Yeah, that's what I
Okay,
think
so
that's what the rabbis are talking about.
yeah, so but is does the inner guy have a ranch and the outer guy just have wheat? What if it's
Haven't
the other
gotten there
way?
yet.
What if it's the other way around?
what
But
does the
Yeah.
outer guy just want to get rid of the inner guy because he wants that field?
maybe, but then why would he build a wall? Maybe he'd
Because to irritate the
to
inner
the inner
guy.
guy. Maybe, but it depends what's irritating. Does the wall irritate or not have the wall irritate? And does he have cows or does he have wheat? Which would be more irritating with or without a wall? I don't know.
Maybe an environmentalist. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So we don't know.
Life is complicated.
Yeah. All right.
Good.
So one more paragraph. The Gemara reports another version of this last answer. There is a practical difference between them with regard to the issue of whether the partition on the fourth side was built by the owner of the surrounding field or by the owner of the surrounded field, that is the inner guy. The first Tana maintains that even if the owner of the surrounding field built a partition on the fourth side, the owner of the surrounded field also gives him his share of the cost of the partitions. And Rabbi Yossi maintains that only if the owner of the surrounded field arose and built a partition on the fourth side does he give the owner of the surrounding field his share of the cost of partitions. Why is that? Because he reveals that he's pleased with the partitions. But if the owner of the surrounding field built a partition on the fourth side, the owner of the surrounded field doesn't give him anything, as he can continue to claim he has no interest in the partitions. That's right. If somebody else is building the walls, how can you prove that the inner guy likes having the wall? We don't know that. So it's 10:21 and I have to get ready for my next thing that I'm doing. So we're going to stop here for today and then we're going to have an actual case of a guy in this situation. So that's how we'll continue next time. And Hope everybody has a good rest of the day. Enjoy the rest of the holiday of Sukkot. And see you all next Sunday.
Thank you.
Not before.
Or
Thank you.
if not before, that's right.
Have a good one. Good one.